My name is Lynn Craig-Guinan, and I'm sitting in the parlour at Mackin House in Coquitlam, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to interview Jim and Mary Lou Wainwright. Welcome. Let's start at the beginning, and I'm going to put this question out to both of you. Tell me a little bit about your earliest memories growing up in the Coquitlam area, and where you grew up in the Coquitlam area. Who'd like to jump in and answer that one?
Well, she started sooner, so she might.
Yeah, well, I wasn't very old when I can remember. About 3 years old, I guess. My memories, my dad went to Denmark and went, and my mother was working on the ferry between Vancouver and a northern town, anyway, Prince Rupert. And when we came back, we didn't have car seats in those days, so when we came back, I was standing in the middle between my mother and Dad on the car seat, and we drove up the driveway and into the backyard, and that's the first thing that I really can say I remember.
Very good.
My birthday was in August, and Dad came home in September, so I was just 3.
Okay. So your parents were originally from Denmark, Mary Lou?
No, my mother was, my grandfather was Scottish and my grandmother was Irish from Ireland. There's a difference. She used to tell us.
I'm Irish, I can say that.
Oh, well, good. Because my grandmother would have agreed with you. So.
And your dad was
My dad and my uncle were Danish.
Danish.
They were both, yes.
And when did they come to Canada?
1926.
And do you know the reason why they emigrated?
Well, my dad was 20 and my uncle was 21 or 2. And they were, they didn't have a father. Their father died just before the last baby was born. And so they wanted to explore the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where did they settle in Coquitlam? Where was your family home?
My family home was on Gatonsbury Road, right across from Coma Lake.
Okay. Okay.
And my dad planted a lot of the water lilies that are still there. Some of them have been stolen out, but they were there for years.
The ones that are actually in the lake still?
Yes.
Right, okay. Mm-hmm. Jim, tell me a little bit about your earliest memories and when you came to Coquitlam.
We arrived, well, actually in Aldergrove first, because we couldn't rent any place. We drove all the way into downtown Vancouver with an old Model A car that we'd driven all the way from the prairies. And there was nothing to rent because the soldiers' wives were all here and everything. So we drove all the way back out to Langley, and a woman there, Mrs. Fiddis, had a rooming house, and it was full, but she made room for us for that night. And then we kept checking the places that were advertised for rent, and there were these shacks for berry pickers and that there was no plumbing, no wiring. You could see through the walls. And then we finally got to Aldergrove, and the Ross Motors, which was a Chrysler dealer at that time, had a house for their mechanic in behind the shop. And at that time, the mechanic they had his own house, so they had rented the house out. And so when my dad went in to talk to them about the house, no problem. And then we found out there was 3 kids. No, you can't have the house. Mm. And my mother was sort of a milquetoast. She wasn't a big fighter, but when he came back and said we couldn't have the house because of the kids, she went in and we had the house. Mm. But the people had been there before. Their kids had torn the fences down and everything. And so my dad fixed everything up. So then they were happy and didn't want us to move when we bought the place in Coquitlam here on the schoolhouse.
So what made them decide to move to Coquitlam, do you know?
Work, like
okay.
Transportation was, driving in those days, and the roads weren't any heck. And so he was working. He was a night manager of the Russell Hotel in New Westminster to begin with. Then he got a job with CPA in in Queensboro, where they rebuilt airplane wings from the war planes.
Okay.
And he worked there till that was shut down, after the war. And then he went to work at the Columbian Hospital as a janitor, and eventually ended up head of maintenance at the hospital.
Wow. Okay.
And then within he retired from that and was doing gardening for doctors that he'd met there at the hospital. And
Yes.
then he was doing some work locally, and he had a stroke, and so sort of ended that, and he didn't die until he was 78, but his memory couldn't carry on a
Right.
fluid conversation.
Okay.
But yet he had an old homesteader from the prairies who came out to visit him one time, and the two of them talked all night because they were talking about things that were in his head.
Yes. Yes. It often happens.
Yeah.
Mary Lou, tell me what Coquitlam was like, what the Gatensbury Street area was like when you were growing up and where your family home was.
Well, there was no side roads off of Gatensbury until you came down to Austin.
Okay.
And when I went to school, I walked a mile to school, and I didn't see a soul. In later years, I met students coming from schoolhouse area and east of that, but that first few years I went to school all by myself.
Okay. And where was school?
It was on the corner of Austin and Nelson.
So, yes. Okay.
It's a fire hall now.
Yes.
And then our high school is a pub.
And Jim, what about you?
Well, when we moved to Coquitlam, there on Schoolhouse Road, and I started school, and that finished grade 5 in the same school and behind her.
Behind her in the classroom.
That's right.
Yes.
And then
Being a pest.
we carried on, went grade 6 and then into the high school, grade 7, and I graduated with university entrance because they'd come and promoted, there was a shortage of architects, and I was pretty good at drafting and everything, so I was going to go in maybe for an architect. But when I graduated that year, I wasn't really ready to go to school, and I'd been up on the Alaska Highway in the summertime working, selling gas and
Okay.
fixing tires, so I went back up north.
Okay.
And, our school, every year the human resources guy, what they call him now, would come up and interview the top 10 students that were graduating and offer them jobs at Fraser Mills.
Okay.
And that was a big mill and with over 3,000 employees at that time.
Yep.
And it was kind of a thing. Everybody went to work at Fraser Mills or the PV, or there was one other place. And I didn't really want to get into that rut, but they offered me a job, and I said, well, I'll have to talk to my parents about it, because we'd been talking about going up north. And so I was going to see my parents that night and then talk to them the next day. Well, he expected me to go home right then, I guess, and talk to them, and then come back, and so the job was gone.
Oh.
So then I felt terribly, I'd let him down, so then I was apologetic about everything. And he says, don't worry, there'll be some more jobs in a couple of weeks. And we got thinking about it, and then this son of a friend of my dad's from the same hometown in Saskatchewan, he got a job to drive a new car from a dealership in Vancouver to the dealership in Whitehorse.
Mm.
And so we decided we were going to do that. So when I went to school, after we'd made the definite plans, I had to go to the principal's office to use the phone so I could phone this human resources guy. And anyway, I phoned him and I told him what the situation was, and he said, oh, well, I'm glad you called. He says, you go up and live up there for a while and everything, and if you ever come back looking for a job, you come and see me. And of course, I got off the phone, and the principal, George Ferguson was his name, he was all over me about, you turned down a job at $200 a month? And I said, well, in rebuttal to that, I said, well, you guys, including we had a counselor that was telling us, you take a job for what you like as well, not just the money. And so I reminded him of this, but that didn't seem to help. He was upset that I turned that job down. So anyway, we went up.
Excuse me, but wasn't it Mr. Mowat?
No. By this time it was Ferguson.
Oh, it
was
was.
gone. Yeah.
Oh, when did he leave?
Well, he went to Abbotsford. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Anyway, away we went up to the Yukon, and the first job I had was a janitor in a construction camp up in the bridge project north of Whitehorse, and I got $235 a month plus free room and board. So, and then those days, a principal in the school might got 160 or something. You see, so.
Yeah. Wow.
So I got into construction anyway, only instead of going in for architecture, I got into supervising big jobs and had to go back to school and take,
Take the training.
engineering courses and surveying and things to be able to accommodate the jobs I was getting. But it worked out fine. I enjoyed it all my life. I was never out of work. And
So how long did you stay away when you were away working? Was it just for a short length of time and then you came back to Coquitlam?
It depends. Like I was in the Yukon for 4 or 5 years, and then when we were married, we went to Kamloops for several years.
Okay, so you were
It
sort
turned
of
out in the end 16 years.
Yeah, okay.
And then back here, and then we were living back down here, and I would work for Bird Construction, a big company from Winnipeg, and I built the addition on the Vancouver City Hall that is about half a block wide and a block long and 7 floors high. So I shared that job with another superintendent.
Okay.
And, I had the experience in the concrete, and he'd been supervising, but only in wooden buildings. So the two of us worked out fine.
Very good, very good. Thank you for that. Mary Lou, coming back to you again, can you tell me a little bit more about the history of Gatensbury Street? Because it was actually named after
Mr. Gatensbury,
Mr. Gatensbury,
who
do you have some history?
originally built the greenhouses and the beautiful house that he had there, and there was pictures of the house, and inside he must have been fairly well off because he had beautiful chinaware in the cupboards and everything, and it was just a beautiful house, and my mum was really in love with it. And then when they were supposed to get married and live there, then that's when the house burnt down, and so they postponed their wedding so that they could build. My dad and my uncle built the house that was on the property of 5 acres, and then when it sold and subdivided, our house was moved across the street. It's still there.
So on what, do you know right now what street that house is still on?
No. Yes. Oh, gee. No, isn't that terrible? I forget.
But it's just on the opposite side from Gatensbury Street itself. It's one of the streets that goes down to the lake there.
Well, it goes up, it goes east.
Okay.
It was on the corner, and it's around the corner.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay.
No, there was no road when I was those years. And isn't that silly? I can't remember it. I had a concussion a few months ago, and I forget so many little things.
Yeah, it happens. But other things will probably trigger stuff for you as well, so
Yes.
don't worry about that.
Well, it might come back to me.
Yeah. Tell me about what family life was like growing up when you were young in Coquitlam. Were families generally small? Were they large? Was it?
Well, we had a lot of different immigrants come, into the country. But there was maybe 3 or 4. One of the, I had a Ukrainian lady that she would babysit me when my mother was from Vancouver, and when my dad went on his commercial drives selling his flowers, she would go into town with him, and I would go and stay with Mrs. Kosip, her name was. And her daughter did housekeeping for this house.
Oh my goodness, for Mackin House.
Yeah, from the Mackin House, yes.
Excellent.
Yes, that was. But they came from a family of 3, I guess. They were all older than me, though. And no, I guess 3 or 4 was about the average.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of them all went to Mountain View School. I don't know if Como Lake was a divide between, the Como Lake Road was a divide between Mountain View School on Smith
Mm-hmm.
and...
Which is still there today.
Yes.
Yeah, Smith and Robinson.
Mm-hmm. The only one that's not is ours.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and but we were about half a mile apart from everybody, and so we got together as kids and played. There was a French-Canadian family that went to the French school here in Millardville, and they didn't come up until junior high. And they went there, but we were friends, and we'd go down there and we'd play a game that was a big open field that their father wasn't using most of the time. And the boys would dig a little hole and put a stick across it, and then we'd get a big long stick and we'd play, what do you call it, hockey or something, no, football, or I don't know what they called it. But anyway, we played that for hours and hours at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And then we all had chores to go home to do,
Mm-hmm.
because you never got away without doing your chores.
So just staying on that for a moment, what sort of chores were mandatory, shall we say?
Well, we didn't have any cows or horses or anything at that time. My brother did, but he was quite a bit younger than I am. But there was the chickens, and in the greenhouse I was weeding every time I turned around.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was planting bulbs and things like that. And and then we always had dogs, and we played with the dogs. And my dad was a hunter, and so they had good hunting dogs, and we played with them all the time. And the dogs were friends, and they lived in the house with us,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
slept in the house with us.
Right, right.
Yes.
Great memories. Thank you.
But there was always other things to do.
Mhm.
Oh, bring up the sawdust from the basement and chop any wood that needed to be chopped. And I did it all because my brother was almost 8 years younger than I am.
Okay. So there was no discrimination based on chores at that
No,
point?
No.
How are the houses heated?
Ours was sawdust burner. We had a sawdust burner and a fireplace.
Mm.
So, they built on a living room on my house in the early 40s. So it was in the living room of the old house. That was a wooden coal burner, just a burner, not a fireplace. But in the newer addition, it was a fireplace,
Mhm.
proper one. And both of them had to have chopped wood.
Mm.
Mhm. And I did 90% of that. Yeah.
So how did the sawdust burner work?
They had a big tube on the side of a stove, and that was and it had a container at the bottom where you could light the stove, and the sawdust came down, and you had to keep the inside of the sawdust burner pan or whatever. No, what do you call it?
No, I thought of it.
It was a tube that went from here to here like this, and it would. My dad was in the greenhouse, so 90% of the buckets we had were 5-gallon for the things that he used in the greenhouse. Well, those is what we carried the sawdust up with, and it would take two 5-gallon baskets of sawdust.
And did you have to buy the sawdust from the Fraser
The
Mills?
sawdust came from Fraser
Fraser
Mills.
Mills.
Yes.
And my guess is that's how most families were heating their homes then.
Then, that's right, most of them wood and everything. And we didn't have electricity in the house for quite a few years. And we had water because we had a huge well on the property that watered all the greenhouses.
Oh, right.
And they pumped it over to the house. And I think it was about 1948 when we got water on the street coming past our place.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I would imagine it wasn't a common thing,
No,
you know,
No.
back then.
and we didn't get a telephone. Val was born in 50, around 50, 1950,
Okay.
because there was power lines that they had to cross, and to bring it down from Combe Lake, they couldn't.
Okay. What were the greenhouses called? Were they called by the family name?
Como Lake Nurseries.
Como Lake Nurseries.
Yes.
Okay. And that was in your family for quite a long time.
Yes, it was in 56 that they moved, they sold,
They sold, and they had them from when roughly?
from 1927, 28,
27.
27, 28.
Okay. Okay.
He worked at 27, bought at 28, I think. That's how it was.
Right. Okay.
And it was from old Tom Trapp, who was the only what was it? What's an Oldsmobile?
It's a General Motors
General,
dealer in
GM.
Westminster.
That had all, that was the only one in Canada that had all the types of cars that General Motors made.
Oh, okay.
And I think it was after old Tom died that they split up took away all of them, because there was 2 or 3 GM dealers in New Westminster, and they were all originally Tom Trapp's seniors.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Jim, coming back to you again, anything that you'd like to fill in, sort of what it was like for you when you were growing up around, early teens, teen?
Well, when we moved in from Aldergrove to Coquitlam, the house was brand new, but what it was is there were kind of hillbilly builders that were building houses because there was a shortage of houses. So we had a 4-room house, no wiring, no plumbing, no insulation, and there was no power, telephone, or water on Schoolhouse Road. And you had to go down to Austin Road where there was a standpipe to fill your pails of water and carry them up to the house, which was, a block or more.
Yes,
And
okay.
us kids had to do that. But it wasn't too long after we moved there that they did put the water line up the road and the power line.
Okay.
And my mother had a desk lamp that she'd had when she was teaching school. And so she plugged it in, and when I came home from school the day they hooked up the power to our house, she says, look, she plugged it in and the light went on. But we had to cut wood, only we cut our own wood off our property. We had acreage there with dense trees. So we cut the trees down and cut them into wood and split them and kept a rack on the back porch full of wood for Mom to cook with. And we had the one cook stove that heated the house and cooked everything. And we caught on after a while. If we filled the thing up, she used it all. If we only went halfway up, she got by on it. So
that was clever.
yeah, so we caught on after a while. But we had a garden and everything, and then I got the idea, I guess that was my carpenter instinct, that I built a little log cabin at the back out of the trees that were there, but I built it out of logs halfway up, and that was so much work. And it was just a little cabin, 6 or 7 feet square,
Okay.
and a porch on it. So anyway, it was just too much work. So then we had a old dead cedar trees there where you could split them up and make shakes and
Oh,
things.
yes,
So
yes.
I started doing that, and I made the rest of the house, the top half out of cedar
Shakes.
and shakes or boards, and then the roof on it was cedar. Yeah. So we had it all the time that we, like until I was married and left there, the house, the cabin was still there, but sometime after when I think we were up in the Yukon at the time, some kid was in it and set fire to it and burned it down. So that
Oh,
was
what a
the end.
shame.
Tell her about you.
But we used to have little wars with the neighbor kids. There was behind that cabin where I was, there was a clearing across some other property. And then there were two families that were cousins, and they each had about 6 kids, you see. And so we got into slingshot wars with them. And the thing was, there were so many of them, and there was just my brother and I, plus the 2 brothers that lived beside us. So we built a big slingshot on old car wheels. And we could shoot, rocks this big. And so we were shooting right across that field. And then they were coming across the field, and there were dead, and all logs and stuff laying there, and they were behind them. And then this Teddy Miller, he stuck his head up, and one of our big rocks just went through his hair. Didn't touch him, but it went through his hair. So we didn't use it anymore
Oh, my
because got him in
goodness.
the forehead.
Well, what you lacked in brawn, you had in brains, it sounded like.
Yeah.
Tell them about your job.
But
Where on Gatensbury was your family home?
ours was on Schoolhouse.
Oh, sorry, on Schoolhouse,
Yeah,
rather.
about a block up from
From Austin Avenue?
Yeah.
Okay.
And everything was gravel, and, the Schoolhouse Road was just a narrow gravel trail up there.
Yes.
And Austin Road, which the old bus ran on, was rough and gravel too. There was no pavement in Coquitlam yet.
Right,
Or
yeah.
maybe down, no, not even, maybe down in Millardville on Burnett Street might have been paved yet.
Right.
That was pretty early.
Because I believe that City Hall was originally across the street.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, in fact, I remember being there quite a number of years, but way back it was there. Mary Lou, you had talked a little bit about different immigrants in the area. What nationalities do you remember most? You'd mentioned Ukrainian, the lady that...
Yes, there was the
Looked
Ukrainian,
after you.
and then there was some people from Norway, and some people from Germany. No, not Germany. Yeah, Germany. Yeah, there was there. And then there was English, and then there was European, a number of different European families that all lived up past Gatensbury on Como Lake,
Okay.
Como Lake Road. Yes. I don't remember. Well, a lot of them didn't speak too good English, and the kids, well, we just fought it out and figured it out.
Yes, yeah. What about accessibility to shops and things like that for food and just household supplies? Where did people go?
New Westminster or Vancouver.
Okay.
And you had to drive in along Kingsway. There was no other road.
Okay. And how long of a journey did that take?
Oh, I don't know, more than an hour, that's for sure.
I couldn't say because I don't remember how long it was, because Dad had customers along Kingsway. Like we had somebody in Burnaby and along there. And Strides, this used to be Strides Nursery. There was a house up there, just in Burnaby, where the borderline, but on Kingsway. And Dad bought some of his flowers and resold them there. He also did some people here on, what's the second? Austin, and then what's the next?
Albert?
Next one? No, the big one.
Rochester?
Yeah, South Rochester.
Okay.
Them and he. So my dad. You only went to town when my dad went to town, and so I couldn't say how long it took him in those days. But I do remember one day coming home with my mom and dad, and it was dark. My mother got out somewhere in Burnaby and walked the car through New Westminster and up past onto Burnett, and we always went home on what was the one that Marmon? No.
The mountain.
Blue Mountain. We always went home Blue Mountain because it was so foggy. My dad just let her. She walked home from there with her hand on the car.
Oh my
in front of the
goodness.
car. Yeah, that's what fog was in those days.
Yeah.
I don't think you see hardly any fog today like there was in those days.
You're not the first person I've heard mention the fog, so I'm glad you brought that up because other people have commented that you couldn't read, it was impossible to read road signs and see traffic lights, what lights there were. And this was a fairly regular occurrence, I believe.
Yes, it was, because the last time I remember being in the fog was just after Mom and Dad had gone to White Rock, and that would be in, say, 55, 56. I came down the highway, and of course that was, and I come onto the flats, and I got off to go into Crescent Beach area, and then up into White Rock area. And I came down, and I'm sure it must have taken me an hour to go from the bottom of the hill onto the flats and to get to the road to Crescent Beach.
Mm.
I was absolutely lost. I didn't know where I was and scared stiff because you
No
do,
doubt.
you know, you come down that hill there on Kingsway, wasn't it? Kingsway.
Dangerous, actually, really.
Oh,
for
it
people.
was.
Yeah. And what do you attribute the extra fog back then? Was it because of the amount of coal or wood that was being burnt, do you think? Maybe contributed to some of that, or is it
Well, it was a
difficult to
lot
say?
colder.
It was a lot colder.
I can remember we went skating on Como Lake just about every year.
Oh, okay. Because that's a rare event now where it'll
It's-
be stable enough to skate on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was cold in those days, and lots of snow.
Okay.
There was, I was looking for some pictures the other day, and there's my brother. He's sitting on top of the mailbox, which was a mailbox on the road, and he's sitting on top of it, and the snow was up to here.
Oh my goodness, that is a lot
Yeah.
of snow.
And my brother, the baby, he was born in 50, and I've got a picture of where we had cleaned a track just in our big driveway, so we could take the stroller up and down, or the buggy, or whatever they call them today.
And were the summers warmer?
Yes,
Okay. Well, that was a nice trade-off anyway.
yeah. My mom was always hated it when she had to go to Vancouver because she had to dress me so much because I ran around in a bathing suit 90% of the time, and I was so sunburned and tanned and everything. And she says, that doesn't look very ladylike. You know? Of course, you know, little girls, they had to be ladylike
Yes.
too in
Yes.
those days.
Yes.
You didn't run around with shorts and pop tops and things
No.
like that.
No, certainly not.
Got potatoes with a long dress on.
Yes.
No, I didn't do that. But my first pants were jeans, and I was probably in 18, something like that.
Right. When you were 18. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, you always wore skirts or dresses,
Yeah.
and they weren't sleeveless.
Yeah.
No.
There was a lot more protocol around
Oh, yes.
dressing and.
And another thing too that I miss is going to different organizations or different dues. You go to a wedding today, they can go in anything.
Mm-hmm.
And they might be, one couple might be in shorts, slacks, or blue jeans or something, and then somebody would look very formal.
Mm-hmm.
But it's usually the older people that look formal.
Yes.
But we all had to go, each place you went, you dressed accordingly, and that's everybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of sad today
Mhm.
because you never know, you know. what do you wear? Am I going to be the odd man out by dressing correctly?
It's hard to know, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yes. What about the transportation system that you remember growing up? What was available to get you around?
Well, if you had a car or you had, no, you walked. And we didn't get a bus until it was well after the war, wasn't it? Was it?
Yeah, well, we had the Columbia stage lines ran from New Westminster along Austin Road to Mundy Road.
Okay.
And back,
Well, I don't remember that.
but they never went off any of the side roads or anything.
No.
Okay.
But then later on, we had a bus system that came up Como Lake, or came up top Blue Mountain and Como Lake, and then down Gatensbury to Austin, and then went up Austin to Mundy Road.
Okay.
And those are about the only streets that were around.
Mm-hmm.
And to Dawes Hill, and then back.
Okay.
But that was in the late
It was
40s.
called the Dawes Hill Bus, actually.
It was called the Dawes Hill bus.
Yeah, then there was one that went to Port Moody too, wasn't there?
I'm not sure.
I think there was the same, but that was it.
So it sounds like that it wasn't unusual, from what I've heard other people say, for people to frequently go to New Westminster on the trams or the buses to do shopping and socialising and things like that. Is that your recollection?
Yes. Well, my grandmother and grandfather lived in, what is the one that goes over?
Kerrisdale.
No, not Kerrisdale, down Port Moody, no. Oh dear, sorry. Anyway,
okay.
they lived off of Bramble Street. Right, what do you call that town that's right down, or it's not a town anymore, it's where,
Marpole?
Marpole area.
Marpole, just around the Marpole area. And what I did when I was a little bit older, say 9 or 10, I would go out, get out of school and walk down Marmont and catch the Fraser Mills bus to take me into town. And then I would catch the Marpole train, or kind of, well, I guess it was streetcars, but they were
Streetcar.
they
yeah.
were like the ones today. They were more like a train type
Okay.
of thing.
Mhm.
And then I'd get off in Marpole and walk up to my grandmother's house.
Mm.
And that was right across where the White Lunch is today,
Okay.
on Granville Street.
Okay.
But later on, there was a tram came to Sapperton.
Okay.
It
Yeah.
dead ended there. And when I went to Vancouver, I'd ride my bike into there and then take the tram into Vancouver, because I fixed watches for a hobby. And so I had to go to the wholesale in Vancouver to get parts.
Right.
So I
Okay.
went in on the tram
Okay.
from Sapperton.
From Sapperton. Okay. And they were probably quite frequent, were they?
I don't know how often they ran, but it wasn't a problem for me to go in there and get a ride into Vancouver. And you went to Carroll and Hastings, was it, where the terminal was. And then the wholesale things were along Pender Street right nearby, so I
Right.
could walk to wherever I had to go. And for a kid to be buying at the wholesale was kind of unusual, but
Yes.
that was a hobby, fixing watches and clocks, and I made a little bit of money out of it.
Good
so.
for you. Yeah.
Well, tell her your first job.
What was your first job?
Yeah, the bicycle, and the paper.
Oh, yeah, delivering the Columbian newspaper.
Oh, yeah.
And we
From
had
New
to-
Westminster.
Yeah, I had to ride into Sapperton to get the papers because they didn't deliver them out to us.
Okay.
And I had about 100 papers, and my brother and I shared. And we rode into Sapperton, got the papers, rode back out to, I started on Austin and North Road delivering along that area, and he came back towards Nelson and Marmont and delivered from there east, you see.
Okay.
And then finally they started, the Columbian had van that brought the papers out to the store at the corner in Nelson and Austin, so we didn't have to go in there to get them.
Can you remember how much you got paid?
Yeah, I got 35 cents a month for each customer.
Okay.
And our papers were, the Columbian paper was a lot thinner, you know, and lighter than the guys who sold the Sun and the Province. Like on the weekend papers, they're thick, and if they had 100 papers, they couldn't pile them on their carrier on
Yes.
the bike, and it was heavy. And they got only 27 cents.
Oh.
But the Columbian paid a little bit more, and it just was a coincidence. I didn't start doing it because of that.
Yes,
it
yes.
worked out that way. And so I made like $35 a month, say, and then I had a charge account at the drugstore where I could get chocolate bars and stuff, which got me a few cavities.
But worth every minute of it, probably.
At the time you thought so. Anyway.
Exactly. What about you, Mary Lou? Did you work outside the home?
No,
Okay.
I worked in the greenhouse,
Right, of course.
and that was a
Yes,
steady
that was-
job.
Yes.
Plus, my mother was sick a lot, so I was chief cook and bottle washer on
Okay.
top of it, but I had to work my hours. My dad put me on proper hours.
Okay.
That was once I wasn't, a little kid.
Yeah.
But there was always weeds, and mother's garden must have been a quarter of an acre, and there was no pay there. But you had to do all the weeding there.
Mm-hmm. How many were in your family?
3.
3. Okay.
I had a brother born when I was 7.5, and then my other brother was 18. I was 18.
Okay.
Yeah, and there was lots of talk in the neighborhood then. So I was working in the greenhouses, and going to commercial college. But my poor mom was pretty sick, and
Yeah.
she was in hospital in Vancouver Island for 6 months or so, and I had a baby and my brother who was 10, and my dad, and plus the greenhouse.
Wow, that's a lot of responsibility.
But it didn't hurt me.
What were the main flowers that were grown in the greenhouse?
Well, in the wintertime, it was before there was any import of foreign bulbs or or things like that. So for Christmas, we started in November, had mums, chrysanthemums that grew, and then we had a big rush at Christmas time for the majority of them. And then we had the greenhouses coming up. We had snapdragons and stalks and things like that that were local. And then when after the war, where especially the Dutch came in, they were selling bulbs and things like that. So we had lots of daffodils and lots of tulips. And my dad forced them. And if forcing, I suppose you know what it is. And and then other things, other different flowers and things like that. But it was mostly that was our basic, because they were all cut flowers that my dad sold in Vancouver, and there was a couple of Burnaby stores that he went into, but he didn't go into Westminster proper as far as sales in a flower shop. There was very little in there at that time anyway.
So all the sales were cut flowers, pretty
Yes.
much. Okay.
Yes, there were.
Okay. Because I was just thinking there when you were talking about the chrysanthemums at Christmas, now it's all poinsettias and things like that. But
Oh, yes,
it's
but
less
they're all
reliance on
in-
the cut flowers.
They've all been immigrated.
Yes. Yeah.
And you see, we didn't have any planes
Yes.
until long after the
Of
war.
course. Of course.
So, no, that kept them really busy.
Yes. Yes.
And there was a lot of things to do. You have to just bud the mums. So things like that, that was a job and a half.
Some of the festivals that happened, Christmas, Easter, Remembrance Day, Canada Day, were they big events? What were the big events when you were growing up?
Christmas, a bit on Valentine's Day, but Easter. And Mother's Day, yes, Mother's Day. And then I don't think Dad had anything else after June. That's when all the, we had to take cuttings of the mums and then grow them from scratch.
Yes.
To be reproducted. And that was it. And then we had house tomatoes in the greenhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And he grew them, and it was in an area where it was warm. And so anybody that walked by in the greenhouse grabbed a tomato, and that's the snack they had in between times. But they were so nice.
Yes, I bet.
No? So.
What about, just coming back to focus on the holidays as a generation, how did you focus, like how were, say, Christmas and Easter celebrated? Were there any different customs or traditions that maybe have died out now that were more common then, or what's your sense of that?
Christmas, from our family, Christmas was the only real, like Easter and all these things didn't seem to ever come into it till
Right.
we moved out here, you know.
Yes, okay.
But the only thing we had that was the Christmas tree, and we had a real Christmas tree that they bought because they were shipped to the prairies from out here.
Yes.
And then we put real candles on them, you know, and of course my mother was terrified that we were going to burn the house down sometime, but
Yes, yes.
luckily we didn't, and
Yes.
lots of people did, and lots of people used them and never had any problems. So.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Well, with us, my dad was Danish, and they celebrated Christmas on Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve, correct.
And of course, that my grandparents were here, they celebrated on Christmas Day, so we always had 2 days. But my dad used to get home very late on Christmas Eve, because that would be his last sales of the season, of the Christmas season. And then New Year's was busy too.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing about Christmas was we always had a Christmas tree, but you didn't put it up until Christmas Eve, because my dad never ever saw a Christmas tree or any light until after supper on Christmas in his country.
Oh,
So that's what they did. So Mom and then Mom and I would go out in the bush and cut down a Christmas tree and bring it home and decorate it before Dad got home. And he'd get home maybe about 9:30, 10, and then we'd have a big Christmas dinner, and it was always a goose
okay.
and red cabbage. And then on Christmas Day we went and had, my grandfather was a real good cook. And so then we had Christmas Day, and she had 3 brothers, and their family too were there.
Mm-hmm.
And that was our Christmas.
Very good.
Yeah.
Any different traditions in your family at Christmas time around food or things like that?
Well, my dad was English.
Okay.
So we always had dark and light Christmas cake, fruit cake.
Oh, yes, of course.
And other than that, like...
Plum pudding?
Pardon?
Plum pudding?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I was just trying to think what else that we had that was sort of English-based. You know.
Yes, yes.
He came here in 1900 and homesteaded in the prairies there. And
Okay.
we moved out here, so. Then we cut our own Christmas trees then too out here, which was kind of a treat.
Yes, yes. May Day, was that a big celebration? Do you remember?
Yes.
Tell me a bit about that.
Well, we both
Yeah.
both were in that, or in school, and it was Millside, Coquitlam, and what was the one over on
Mountain View.
Mountain View? Is that all? The 3 of us?
Yeah.
3 of us. So we'd have a little vote for who was going to be the May Queen, and I forget how they determined who was going to be the queen of the 3 of them. how did they master that vote? I don't know.
Wow.
But anyway, the three, and then they were, and I don't remember too much about elementary school, but when we were in high school, we had a teacher, a gymnasium teacher, that was very, very good in exercises and things like this and in school in those days. And so the seniors, like the girls in the high school, they did a big display, and that was something. And we always had, Westminster came to our May Day, and Port Coquitlam, and I don't know, the Catholic school. The Catholic school came up too for a while. But most of them were younger, you see, because it was in grade 7 or 8 that...
And was there a parade?
But the biggest thing was the maypole dancing.
Oh,
the
right.
maypole
That
dance.
Yes.
was every year.
Yes.
Yeah, and the kids all did the maypole dance and other little displays of things like that. Yeah.
I wonder when that stopped. Have you any sense of when that might have been?
I don't know, television maybe.
Because I know Port Coquitlam still has quite a significant May Day parade every year, and I'm just wondering, because it sounds like Coquitlam had quite an established celebration every year around that. So it's
Yeah,
a
we
pity
had.
that
Up in
we no longer have it.
Blue Mountain Park on Mountain Road there, up
Mm-hmm.
past the school, and that's where it was every year.
In Blue Mountain Park.
Yeah,
Right.
Yes.
So that's where the maypole was.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, how many maples did they have? They might have had dozens.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was lots of and that was an important thing for the little kids.
Mm.
Yeah, that was something. And they all had to have dresses on that looked so pretty and things like that.
Nice.
Oh,
nice.
yes, it was.
And the ribbons were all
Different colors.
crepe paper, you know, and twisted.
Okay.
And of course, to get kids to practice first and then have those things for the May Day to keep from getting them tangled up and broken, and
And torn.
must have been a lot of fun for the teachers.
Oh, yeah.
I can imagine.
I think we gave the teachers a good run for their money.
Yeah. Oh. What about other world events? The Second World War. What are your memories around the Second World War? Were any relatives involved, or
Not-
any friends,
not-
families?
We had friends, but we used to listen to the news on the radio, and I kept a sort of a log or a diary of it, and then when we were driving out here to the coast, it was the same thing. I did that, and I still have it somewhere. Yeah, and then I wrote in whatever the news had said that the Germans did, or the Russians did, or
Yes.
Canadians did, or whatever, you know. So, but
I can remember the day that war was declared, and my uncle, he was married and was living on Blue Mountain, and they worked in the greenhouse. And he came over and he asked my dad, "Have you had the news on?" And he said, "No, I haven't," and he was in the greenhouse. And he said, "Well, you better turn it on because we're at war." And that was, then we had a neighbor that's up the street, and he lived right beside where they've got a dog hospital today. And he didn't have any of the radio or anything. So he used to come down at 8 o'clock at night, every night, because that's when the news came on, special. And he came down every night to watch the 8 o'clock news. And he was a bachelor, an old bachelor. And yes, and I guess everybody sat and watched the radio for a few days. And then my dad was very worried about, because my dad was, neither my dad or my uncle were naturalized, for the simple reason that my grandmother was a widow and she was losing 2 of her boys and she wasn't too happy. So she sewed into their shirt or their coats enough money for them to come home in at any time. And so as long as their mother was alive, they wouldn't naturalize themselves.
Okay.
And then when she did go, then they naturalized themselves. But then they called them up, to both of them, to go into the Danish army.
Yes.
And then he'd have to go back home. And lucky for us, they were both 4F, which was a big deal in a way. But we didn't see or hear anything from any part of our family for 3 years.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, that was a big deal.
That must have been very difficult.
It was very, very difficult. And no, it was a long time before they knew anything about their family.
We tend to forget. Okay. Because you mentioning earlier on as well, both of you, that with the immigrants that were living in the area, with a lot of them having originated originally and emigrated from Europe, it must have been a scary time for quite a number of
Yes.
people living in the Coquitlam area. Yeah, uncertain times.
Uncertain times.
Uncertain times, yeah.
A lot of tension for them.
We're sort of heading into the final stretch here, so I'm just going to just open it up just for a few minutes and see, is there anything that maybe we haven't touched on that you feel would be useful just to share, whether it's a memory or something geographically or...
Well, one thing, driving around here, there's not too much of any of the old houses that were here.
Yes, yes.
No.
You mean up the hill or down here at
Both.
Mackin House? Both.
Both. And Millardville was just a little town.
Yes.
I had a couple of girlfriends that lived down here, and none of their houses are here.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's a big change. And then it's a very modern municipality now,
Yes.
where before. But it was nice. I loved it. I didn't want to move.
And it sounds like all in all it was a very safe community for people growing up as children.
You never had to worry about your kids being bothered by perverts or anything else. I mean, you went all over the place by yourself.
Yes.
And
You didn't lock your doors necessarily, and
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
we did.
Yeah.
Because we had a drunk that lived up the road from us. And because we had a big house and the cars and everything there, they used to think we had the phone. Well, we didn't have the phone. So then this drunk would come and when I don't know why, but he worked at Fraser Mills, and he walked all the way from Fraser Mills up to Como Lake. I say Como Lake as my water, but it was almost up to Como Lake Road that they lived. And we saw him crawl home on his hands and knees many, many times. But then sometimes they'd come and his drunken friends would come to the house. Well, my mom and dad, sometimes when they went to Vancouver, and Mom would go and see her mother and father, then they go to the White Lunch. That's the place to eat and maybe go to a show. Well, they didn't come home till late. And these guys would come and knock at the door and try and get in. And we put knives in the doorway so you couldn't open the door. And sometimes I'd go to bed and forget, and I didn't hear my mom. Or once you heard the car come into the yard, you just relaxed and
Yes.
fell asleep. They couldn't get in until they banged on the door. But those were fun days.
yeah.
But yeah, but basically, no, there wasn't any problems with the kids. I don't know of anybody that had any problem with the kids. The one worst thing that I do remember was Mom was sick and she was in bed, and her bedroom faced the lake, and the lake was frozen over, and Dad says we couldn't go, and I was closing the curtains on it, and I saw some kids out there skating on the water. And I said, oh, can I go skating? I'm not in the water, on the frozen ice. And Dad says, well, we'll see. And then all of a sudden, one of them went through the ice.
Oh my goodness.
And I screamed and yelled, and Dad went roaring, and Uncle Johnny was down somewhere where you can see it. And he went roaring down with a ladder to go onto the lake. And he went through. Well, my dad was in such a panic. He was coming from the house. And us, there was myself, I guess somebody else was there. And we had taken up a big boat, not a big rowboat, from the lake because it was freezing. And it took 3 of us to put, my dad, my uncle, and myself, pull this doggone boat up there. Dad yelled at us to come and help because we had to put the boat in the water or onto the ice, so if you sunk. We couldn't keep up with my dad. He ran down there with that, he was
Dragging the boat.
dragging
Oh my
the boat.
goodness.
He was
Yeah.
so scared. And anyway, the kids that were with him, there was 3 of them. It was Porky Madsen. Did you know Porky Madsen? Anyway, he went through. My uncle got him out, and they practiced try and get him there. And they brought him into the greenhouse and, of course, called the doctor and everything else. But he died. And that was the first person I'd ever seen die. And he was in the greenhouse for a while, and then his family came to the door, and, you know, and it was sad. And the thing I felt more sorry about, when I think of later years, he and his older sister had had just a big fight before he took off. You know, they were 14 and 16 or something, which is nothing.
Unfortunate, yeah.
But she was so dramatic and so hard on her. Of course, the whole family, too. But that was a terrible experience.